Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly, by writer and academic Effie Samara. Effie, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you, Kenny.
And on the other side of me, we have Drew Hendry MP, the SNP's business spokesperson. How are you doing, Drew?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Well, of course, it is Happy GERSmas Day to everybody. But before we get to all of that, we start with our coronavirus update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 494,684 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 474,696 were confirmed negative, 19,988 were positive. There are 67 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly there were 2 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. This will of course be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get tested. As always, we do urge you, if you're showing any symptoms at all, please do book a test as quickly as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, 249 were in hospital last night, 2 of whom were in intensive care. And the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 2,494. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 41,499 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 16 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And as it's Wednesday, we also have the weekly analysis for Scotland for the week ending 23rd of August. This shows that last week a total of 6 people died where COVID-19 was mentioned on the death certificate, of which 4 occurred in care homes and 2 in hospitals. This is 3 more deaths than last week. This takes the total number of coronavirus-related deaths in Scotland under this measure to 4,222. Total excess deaths last week were around 4% above the 5-year average. Other analysis shows that the NHS is now under much less strain than at the peak of the pandemic. Admissions due to COVID-19 have now fallen to fewer than 1 per day for the 2 weeks up to the 12th of August. At the same time, A&E across Scotland is back to 83% of normal attendances, having fallen as low as 40% in March. Meanwhile, emergency admissions have risen from a low of 60% in late March to 87% now, while planned admissions rose from their low point of 27% in mid-April to 67% now. We would like to remind you that while it's not operating completely as normal yet, the NHS is open. If you need treatment, please do contact NHS 24 or your GP to get advice on how you can get that treatment. And before we get on to the rest of today's news, we would just like to remind you, if you want to join the conversation here on Scotland at 7, you can do so on Twitter. You can follow us at Broadcast Scot and then use the hashtag Scotland at 7. That's hashtag Scotland AT and the number 7. And as you can see, we'll be flashing some of those tweets up on the screen as we go through the show. But as I said, it is GERSmas, the day that we all look forward to every year when the GERS figures are published. And Scotland's tax revenues continued to increase in 2019-20, although they were impacted by the initial effects of the coronavirus. Today's Government Expenditure and Revenue Scotland publication shows that overall revenue, including North Sea receipts, increased to a record £65.9 billion. Onshore revenues grew by £1.1 billion to reach £65.2 billion. These increases came despite the pandemic depressing public finances. Corporation and VAT receipts fell compared to the previous year, and both the Scottish and UK governments increased spending to help tackle the virus. As a result of this, plus a rise in UK government spending on reserved matters, Scotland's notional onshore deficit, the difference between income and expenditure, rose 0.6% to 9.4% of GDP, the same rate of increase as the UK. Adding North Sea revenues, which totalled £724 million, £642 million less than in 2018-19, the notional overall deficit stood at 8.6% of GDP. And we asked Finance Secretary Kate Forbes today how this focus on GDP related to Scotland's movement towards a well-being economy? Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. How useful is GERS in the context of Scotland moving towards a well-being economic framework? Has any thought, for example, been given to applying some sort of triple bottom line accounting so that we could look at our carbon deficit and our social deficit as well as our notional fiscal deficit?
What matters when it comes to a wellbeing economy is your budget. It's what you choose to spend through your budget every year that counts. GERS are not the Scottish Government's budget. And therefore, when it comes to our choices to invest, when it comes to balancing our budget, that is a process that we undertake every year. It will shortly be beginning again. And our choice is there to invest the resources that we have in dealing and tackling with inequality, in ensuring that we are investing in public services and ensuring that we are supporting businesses to grow across Scotland.
So that was Kate Forbes speaking at a press conference earlier on this morning. So Drew, I'll come to you first on this. We know that GERS doesn't tell us an awful lot of very useful information at the best of times. And in the situation we're in now, it seems to me that GDP is even less important than it ever was. It's kind of highlighted why well-being economics makes more sense, because right now we're worried about people living and dying, not whether businesses are growing at a faster than ever rate. What do you make of the overall kind of discussion that goes on around GERS and the discussion that you've seen today?
Well, I think what we see with the GERS report when it comes out is every year the annual reminder of why Scotland needs to be an independent country. This is the figures that are based 40% on the spending of the UK government, 70% on the income gathered by the UK government. So it doesn't in any way reflect what Scotland would be doing or the choices it would make in terms of a well-being economy. And there are really good examples of that during this COVID pandemic. Clearly, I know we're wanting to speak later on about furlough schemes and about universal basic incomes and things like that. But I'm absolutely certain that we'd be taking very different choices over what we choose to spend money on in Scotland and how we choose to raise money. If we don't have those levers from the 70% of income raising powers, then you can't make the kind of choices that you need to make. But I think GERS also tells us something else. It tells us about the mismanagement of the economy of Scotland by the UK government over the time since it started. The Scottish government can't run a deficit on their own. Every year they've got to bring in a balanced budget. It's got to absolutely make sure that it ticks the boxes of being so. So we can't run up. The UK government runs up debt on our behalf. We don't have borrowing powers at the moment. So when you look back over the 40 years of GERS, you can see that actually Scotland's finances throughout that period of time, we wouldn't have needed to borrow anything. But of course, now that we're in a situation where we need to emerge from a pandemic, we need to make different choices. We don't have those powers in Scotland to do that. And that's why it's absolutely vital that we move on to a state where we can actually become independent and we can make the kinds of choices that we need to make in order to make sure that there is a genuine social justice in this country going forward and that people are treated properly and we reduce the rampant inequality that we've seen throughout UK governments over these very many years.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a structural problem, isn't there, with the way GERS operates, because it says that money that's very largely spent in London on a lot of the reserved functions that we have is somehow a deficit for Scotland, whereas in an independent Scotland, all those jobs, all that money would be spent in Scotland, which would obviously change the whole picture. Is this just a setup, do you think, to make Scotland look bad?
Well, obviously that was the original intention. If you go back to when it was first dreamt up in 1992 by the Tories, it was to paint a picture of how good, the UK looked, and that's backfired for a number of reasons. I mentioned if you look back over the period of GERS. If you look at one of the lines in there alone, which is the public service debt interest line, we've now paid something like £130 billion from Scotland on interest alone on paying debts that we didn't run up and we wouldn't have needed to run up. Because, as I said, that Scotland wouldn't be in the position of having to have had any borrowing up until now if you use the very same GERS figures that we're looking at just now. So I think it very much depends on where you look at in what context you look at these GERS figures in. The unionists like to say, look at that deficit without the UK, how would you survive? But of course, the really obvious answer for that is, well, look, that's a UK deficit. That's been run up on our behalf, and buying things over the period of years like nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction that we don't want, making other choices that we don't necessarily want here in Scotland. And of course, there is some interesting things within GERS about the apportionate spend that we have. If you look at the line on defence, for example, I'd love to know where the £3.5 billion is actually spent in Scotland, because I don't see that as a footprint at all. And when you look across the Irish Sea at Ireland, I think their budget is for defence every year something like £900 million for an independent country. So, there's lots within GERS. I don't rubbish the statisticians because, if I can say that one, but because they're just doing the job that they should be doing, trying to make the best guess from the situation they've got. But it's far, far from perfect, and it certainly gives a lot of different views for people to take out of it. My view is very, very firm on that, in that it exposes the way Scotland's been mismanaged by Westminster over decades.
Mm-hmm. And Effie, on this note that we raised with Kate Forbes, the idea that maybe we shouldn't be thinking so much about our fiscal deficit right now. Maybe the bigger things to think about are our social deficits, or if you want to use that term, and our carbon deficits, the amount of carbon that we're burning off versus the amount of carbon that we're putting back into soils, or other kinds of carbon capture type things. What do you make of the way that these numbers are used? What's been your take on the debate that's gone on over these?
Well, as Drew mentioned, GERS was conceived by Ian Lang in 1992, I believe, and obviously the idea behind GERS was to reinforce the argument against Scotland ever daring to think of itself as an independent state. And GERS has done this job quite well over the decades. I would refer in this instance to the work of Richard Murphy, who is, I believe, an English lecturer and of accounting law, and he pretty much daily produces some sort of insight into the estimated figures on GERS. I scanned the document very, very quickly, and I think I counted the word estimate in this present document about 166 times across, I believe, about 70 pages. So that tells you really what you need to know about the reality, and also whether these figures are consolidated against Scotland's real fiscal deficit. There is, as Drew mentioned, there is really no fiscal deficit. I believe the figure is about the UK deficit is positioned at about 24 billion against Scotland's 12 billion, where you carry 10% of the population. Now that in itself demonstrates the veracity, the non-veracity of the figures, obviously given that UK debt at the moment stands at just over 2 trillion. And that is entirely to do with decisions taken by Westminster for Westminster. GERS, obviously, as Kate Forbes mentioned, will never reflect anything to do with well-being, environmental concerns, the future of education, people's concerns about poverty, about youth, about older age, about health, because it is purely about advancing an argument, and it does that job quite well. So the only way that you can put forward any argument at all on well-being is through an independent country which would have the ability to raise its own debt, or otherwise look at Norway. They need no debt. In fact, they have a surplus, and they are comparable to Scotland in terms of both population and resources. So you would not necessarily have debt if the economy is managed well, but under GERS, you will never aim to see anything to do with well-being.
Yeah. And I mean, coming from somewhere outside Scotland, I mean, you lived in England for a number of years. You're not originally, you're originally from Greece. How does it look to you, having come to Scotland, to see this kind of debate? I mean, I imagine in Greece there isn't a debate that says, oh, well, look at Crete's massive deficit. You know, they rely on Athens' generosity. It's quite an odd kind of thing to happen, isn't it?
Well, you know what? I didn't quite catch that debate in Greece, because when I was shipped off to sunny Berkshire, I was about 12 years old.
Of course, sorry.
But no, don't apologize. But my dad has been very much at the center of that all my life. So I've had a belly full of it. No, they would obviously, as with any country, the constituent parts of that country would not come into, as you rightly pointed out, into that debate. So if Scotland were a constituent part of the UK, in the same way that Manchester, for example, does not come into the figures as standing out as a city of excess debt or deficit, in the same way you wouldn't have that. But it's designed to do the exact opposite. It's designed to highlight the fiscal burden, the problem with Scotland, where in fact I think and I know that there is actually no such accounting or fiscal problem.
Mm-hmm. And Drew, it kind of, there's this kind of structural question. We're always told that the whole of the UK relies on London. London and the southeast are the only places that are actually making money. The rest of us are all, mendicants, just relying on London's goodwill. But of course, that's an economic choice. That's a political choice that's been made to focus on the financial sector in London as the driver of the economy. How different do you think things could be if even if the UK were to move away from that kind of industrial strategy?
It'll be massively different. One of the things that we've seen from GERS reports have been carried out in other nations and regions of the UK are, it's far bigger so-called notional deficits around the north of England, for example, where they're well in excess of what's being attributed to Scotland. And of course, London and the southeast is an overheated part of the UK. But at the bottom of this is the hypocrisy of the UK. In the 5 years that 2019-20, the UK government's cumulative deficit was some £290 billion. For the past 74 years, 62 of those, the UK government's been running a deficit. So, to lecture Scotland over this notional deficit is, rank hypocrisy. The fact is that we would make different choices. You mentioned something in passing a few moments ago about the choices that we would make in terms of our economy. There's no doubt the Scottish Government over the past decade or so have had to use environmental powers as opposed to economic powers to move our renewable energy transition forward with such dramatically successful results. We could do much more. Carbon capture and storage was something you mentioned specifically, and that's something we could have had a world lead on 5 years ago if the rug hadn't been pulled from underneath Peterhead and the £1 billion betrayal there over carbon capture and storage. Scotland could already be producing the technology which actually starts to mitigate against some of the real climate challenges that we have here just now with the infrastructure that's already in place. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are, I think, hundreds of different choices that we would make. Some may be similar, but many, many more would be vastly different than we've seen from this Westminster UK government. One of them, I'm sure, would be, wouldn't be paying our share of an unelected House of Lords.
Yeah. There are, of course, many of these debates. They will obviously drag on for as long as we remain a part of the UK, because this just is the way that we do things here, unfortunately. But we will move on just now to another economic story. The SNP's Westminster leader has renewed calls for the UK Treasury to commit to extending the furlough scheme on the day that Germany joined France in extending their version of the scheme to almost 2 years. Ian Blackford MP highlighted that while other European countries have the full economic levers to protect jobs, household incomes and living standards, Scotland faces the potential loss of 200,000 jobs unless the job retention scheme is extended beyond its planned end date in October. And this is really one of those economic choices questions. The UK government, Drew, has decided that we need to all be just starved back to work, even if the pandemic is still a problem. Meanwhile, France and Germany are able to say, let's make sure that people who can't go back to work yet, maybe sectors that are going to struggle for a while longer, still have the support in place. Why do you think the UK government is so intent on cutting off this furlough funding so quickly?
Well, it can only be ideological. We know that the Tories, this is unnatural ground for the Tories to be on. And let's be clear here. I welcomed the furlough scheme, as did all of my colleagues. It was by no means unique, as you've just pointed out. France and Germany are going to continue their schemes for 2 years, but it was a welcome thing for them to do. But it sat very uncomfortably with the Tory view of the world, and the fact that they don't like doing this kind of support, social support, even in such a time of real crisis in this pandemic. And I think they have decided to cut it short because that's their view that businesses and people have now got to stand or fall. Of course, it's a horrendous view to take. The social impact is magnified by the economic impact of this. If they do press ahead and remove furlough in October, it means that many people, particularly living in rural constituencies, like mine's is largely rural just now, where we rely on the hospitality and tourism trade for about 20% of our economy. There are going to be a lot of people, businesses, families, children that are going to be affected by job losses, by the fact that these businesses are effectively facing 3 winters in a row in terms of their income. They've got no money, no spare money. They've used up anything they had during this summer of the pandemic to keep themselves afloat. And I think this is going to be a real danger to our society if the Tories don't change tack, or indeed if they continue to fail to allow Scotland the power, the very, very minor borrowing powers that we've asked for in order to take action for ourselves.
Well, at Holyrood now, and the SNP has said the Tories are out of touch and out of step with the needs of Scotland's farmers and crofters after voting against a more progressive system of agricultural support funding. Tory MSPs ignored the views of all of Scotland's main farming and crofting organisations as they supported attempts to bring in new laws that would restrict Scottish ministers from improving the current payment system for farmers. During the Stage 3 debate on the Scottish Government's agricultural bill this afternoon, the Tories were repeatedly warned that the purpose clause they were supporting would prevent changes being made to the current CAP system, even after the EU has moved on to a more progressive system. It's the second time in a week that Scottish Tories have acted against the best interests of Scotland's farming community. Last week, the Tories' former rural economy spokesperson Peter Chapman MSP shocked Parliament by saying he didn't care about the views of the National Farmers Union Scotland, proclaiming they were wrong about Westminster's controversial internal market proposals. And Effie, the Tories traditionally had a strong degree of support amongst farmers, and yet we've seen repeatedly, as we said in this story recently, the Tories just seeming to have contempt for farmers. What do you think is behind that change in rhetoric that we're seeing from the Tories just now?
Well, obviously, it's an urgency to see some sort of agreement formulating, possibly with the United States, I imagine. We have seen the activity surrounding Liz Truss, who I believe a couple of weeks ago removed some of her meetings from the House of Commons archives and reclassified them as private when she was meeting with American people or in American diplomats, as it were, trade missions. So you obviously have the catastrophe of Brexit looming. So they need to either, as they say, get Brexit done, which part of which is a lot, as we know, which is now a fact, a lowering across the board of all standards, be it human rights, be it agriculture, be it pharmaceuticals, be it environment, be it workers' rights, be it women's rights, be it children's rights. So this needs to happen. And if you go back through the whole ideological narrative of the Rees-Moggs, the Cummings, the lot of them actually over the last 7 or 8 years, you will find, it will not take you long at all, Kenny, to find every single trace of that intention. The idea was to remove the safeguards. They used to call it remove the bureaucracy. We now know that the bureaucracy will increase. Northern Ireland is going to have to complete, I believe, it's 3 customs forms in order to ensure transportation of goods and livestock across the Irish Sea into the UK. So this is not to do with bureaucracy. This is to do entirely with imposing their own standards. They never liked European standards because they're much higher to what they aspire. Now, agriculture comes under that. In the invention of the idea of the internal market, I believe Mike Russell analysed it fantastically in your interview of last Friday. This is something where the standards imposed will be purely there in order to erase the devolution settlement. So this is in order to remove resistance or to remove the ability of any one of the devolved administrations to counteract any of the arguments. This isn't about in promoting the market, because promoting the market, the deal was there. They were in the EU. That was the best deal they could have had. Now they've destroyed that and they need to create different arguments. This is part of it. It's the rhetoric, it's the ideology, and it's about getting Brexit done.
Mm-hmm. And Drew, obviously you live in a very rural constituency. What have some of the farmers in your constituency been saying to you about this kind of noise coming out of the Tories?
Well, they're aghast at what's going on. I'm not in the Scottish Parliament in Westminster, but I sat in the Trade Bill Committee where the Tories there just voted to lower standards, food standards, in terms of allowing access to other markets into the UK, and of course that means into Scotland too, where we can be flooded with inferior products. They didn't take any opportunity to, as we'd asked them to, as we put forward amendments for them to protect farming and our food, our very good quality food products here in Scotland. And in the Scottish Parliament, what we see on a daily basis is the Tories who are supposed to be standing up for Scotland now just capitulating and becoming Boris Johnson's yes folk to just to get them to do anything. Now they said that originally we had Ruth Davidson talking about the benefits of the EU and the fact that we must be taken out of the single market, and now we see that they've just completely done this volte-face where they're they're willing just to do anything to capitulate to Boris Johnson's hard Brexit. And of course, farmers get caught in the crossbar with that. And they're very, very aware of the challenges they'll not only face through the imposition of lower standards and losing rights and power here in Scotland, but also the disadvantage that they're going to be at when they look across at Northern Ireland with the measures that are going to be taken there, measures that they would have been happy to see as a backstop for Scotland. But of course, they're now being further disadvantaged in the European market, as well as being faced with being flooded with imports.
Yeah, we will obviously keep an eye on that story as it develops, that agriculture bill debate. Obviously, it was today the stage 3 debate. We will let you know as that all progresses. But we cross the Atlantic now, and 2 people died and a third was wounded after street protests over the police shooting of a black man erupted into gun violence late last night and early this morning in Kenosha, Wisconsin, police have said. The town has faced civil unrest since Sunday when police shot Jacob Blake in the back at point-blank range. The incident, captured on video, has reignited protests over racism and the police use of force in the United States. Social media videos show crowds in Kenosha chasing a gunman down the street after they believed he had shot another man. The gunman falls to the ground where he comes under attack, but he fires a number of rounds, appearing to hit a man in the torso who falls to the ground and seriously wounding another man in the arm. As the crowd disperses around him, the man walks freely down the street with his hands in the air and rifle hanging in front of him. Several police vehicles, apparently responding to the mayhem, drive past the man without stopping him. There have been no reports of an arrest. And Drew, we heard that this Kenosha Guard, a sort of self-organised militia, had told people they were going to be on the streets. We saw video as well of them meeting with police, getting handed bottles of water, having the police tell them, "We really appreciate you guys. Thank you for coming out." What is going on in the States? I mean, we don't have a lot of time, but what's going on that there's such open violence and such disproportionate responses to it?
Well, for one thing, I think there's been a long-term struggle for genuine human rights for Black people, and the Black Lives Matter campaign has really highlighted that there is still such a long journey to go on in the States to see genuine progress there. But of course, the main thing here is that this is all about leadership and about the tone from the top. And I don't think that Donald Trump has done anything other than stoke up the division here and encourage some of this activity. It really needed a firm line against the atrocities that are being inflicted on people at the very beginning, and an understanding that they needed to be reaching out to heal communities. And Donald Trump has done nothing for that. And as I say, in fact, he's gone the other way, and that leadership has been sorely missing from the US over the past 4 years. And I think things are gradually getting worse. I hope that there is a better outcome in the coming months. I hope we can see a change of the way that they handle these things, and an understanding that the communities there have to be brought together, not torn apart.
Mm-hmm. And we've just got a report in from someone who I happen to know was a cop at one time, saying a 17-year-old is now in custody for the shootings in Kenosha. We don't have any more on that just now. But Effie, we saw, for example, last night at the virtual Republican National Convention, Trump had brought out to speak the couple, the white couple who had waved their guns at protesters a few weeks ago. He's really not helping in kind of calming the situation and trying to make people perhaps take a breath before they act on any of this, is he?
Kenny, let's not forget who Donald Trump is. And obviously you cannot judge a son through the actions of his father, but I believe his father was actually arrested for being a member of the KKK in the 60s. Now, Donald Trump has been raised on the basis of those ideals. This is who he is. And this isn't just simply to do with the history of his father, of his family. Donald Trump was elected on a racist, openly homophobic, racist ticket. This is his ideology. He never hid it, starting with questioning the ethnic purity, if you like, or the validity of Obama's citizenship, right through to threatening Mexico, right through to engaging small babies and separating them from their mothers, which resulted in the death of several of those infants, right through to removing people who had the right to remain in the United States, right through to stopping people because they had been raised Muslim or had been born in a Muslim country, I'm sure you remember right at the beginning of his presidency. So this is a man who deeply and profoundly subscribes to racist, fascist ideals. And I don't say this simply to make an emotional point. I have made the point previously on the program as an academic point as to exactly what it means to be a fascist. And obviously there are gradations of fascism. Not everyone is as fascist as perhaps another person, but he bears all the hallmarks of a fascist leader. He's not really a leader. He is obviously, there's a big network there. We're not quite sure what the state of his mental health is. But what's very interesting about him is that he operates solely on that basis, and he cares very little about what you and I may think. He just cares about his base, and he's constantly talking to his base. And obviously the theater, the cheap performance of the Republican convention this week has borne testament to this. It is nothing other than fathers and sons. All his children have been paraded, reinforcing those ideas. He's happy when he sees these scenes, and not only is he happy, I also believe that there are orders from higher up within the police to operate in this manner. Let us not forget the United States also has a history with the American black population. This is not new, but Trump in the last 4 years has done all he could within his powers to reinforce whatever racism and whatever fascist and neo-Nazi, ultra neoconservative belief. This is basically a cult that he has been cultivating, and let's hope we'll see the end of it in November.
Yeah, we will obviously keep watching that. Well, we move on now to Belarus, and Belarus's most celebrated writer has called on Russia to help persuade President Alexander Lukashenko to negotiate, as she arrived for questioning in a criminal case accusing an opposition body of an illegal attempt to seize power. Now Lukashenko speaks only to Putin. We need him to speak to the people, Svetlana Alexievich, winner of the 2015 Nobel Prize for Literature, told reporters outside the investigative committee where she appeared for questioning. Maybe the world can help us so that Lukashenko will negotiate with somebody, she said. We need the world to help, maybe Russia. She emerged after a short time and said she had invoked her right not to testify against herself. She said there was no basis for the investigation, adding, "The more we stay together, the stronger we will be, and the greater chance we will have of making the authorities talk to us." Alexievich is one of dozens of public figures who formed the Opposition Coordination Council last week, with the stated aim of negotiating a peaceful transition of power after an election the opposition say was rigged. Lukashenko has called it an attempt to seize power illegally. Two of its other leaders were jailed yesterday. And Drew, these protests in Belarus have dragged on now for 3 weeks. We've seen people arrested. We've seen a couple of people killed by the security forces there. Do you think that Putin can step in and arrange somehow for a peaceful transition in power, or do you think this is going to require some other intervention to help move things along?
Well, first of all, thank you for bringing this piece up tonight. I think it's absolutely vital that we keep the focus, the attention on Belarus just now, so that we can see people there get their right to their self-determination, which has clearly been robbed through through this fixed election, this farcical election that we've seen. And I think when we're looking at international actions, people in Belarus will know best how they want to take that forward. And if there is a route with Putin, I'm sceptical myself because of his history, but if there is a route with Putin, then and that works for them, then so be it. But right here, what we should have seen is a much stronger reaction from the UK government, who've been very wishy-washy about this. We just can't see this kind of abuse going on across nations that in Europe and beyond that are so brazen, and there should be much more pressure from the UK government in terms of trying to get the international community to place further pressure on the Lukashenko to stand down and let them have free and open elections so that they can choose the leadership that they want for their country.
Mm-hmm. And Effie, this is, it's a difficult situation for everyone. Do you get any sense from what you've seen of this that there is going to be movement, or do you think Lukashenko is going to be able to hang on by his fingernails and perhaps jail enough of the leaders, potentially kill some of the protesters, and dissipate these protests?
He'll certainly try, Kenny. I mean, he's made a start already. There's been deaths and arrests. But I think I will just echo Drew in saying that the more pressure that he faces from the international community, the more difficult he'll find it to pursue this very authoritarian diktat that he has put, this path that he's put himself on. Also, obviously, it would be very welcome to see some more coordinated action from Brussels. I believe that there has also been movement from that side, but it would be great for that to be reinforced and reiterated. And obviously, the UK government now, as an outsider, as a third country, as it were, any pressure would be good. As Drew said, if they're going to be lucky enough to see any goodness from Putin, that would be amazing. Somehow, I don't think the blessing's going to come from Russia this time for Lukashenko.
Well, we move now to Cyprus, and convicted fraudsters, money launderers and political figures accused of corruption are among dozens of people from more than 70 countries who have bought so-called golden passports from Cyprus, according to a new report by Al Jazeera. The so-called Cyprus Papers is a leak of more than 1,400 passport applications approved by the government of the island between 2017 and 2019, and it raises serious questions about the Cyprus investment programme. The programme enables people to obtain Cypriot citizenship by investing at least €2.15 million in the country, usually by buying property. These passports can be extremely valuable assets as they provide freedom of movement and work within the European Union, as well as access to European banking. Buyers are said to include a number of wealthy Russian, Ukrainian, Middle Eastern and Chinese business people facing corruption charges, and at least one who acquired his passport while in prison, which is meant to be impossible under the rules of the programme. Al Jazeera has also redacted several names, as the scheme is also thought to be used as a way for wealthy but politically at-risk people in authoritarian states like China and Saudi Arabia to get themselves and their money out of their home countries. Drew, I mean, we've heard of similar sorts of cases in Malta of passports essentially being for sale to wealthy business people. How big a problem do you think this is for the EU if people are able to just buy their way in and bring potentially dirty money with them?
Well, it's an enormous problem. It's, as you say, it's nothing new, neither in European EU countries nor in the UK, where money for an awful long time has been able to buy quite a lot of comfort for those people who are willing to pay for it. But this is a problem. In my view, this is something that the EU should have cracked down on some time ago. They should have taken action to make sure that if they are going to have these inward investment programs, that the people are fit and proper to gain citizenship, because as you pointed out, it's allows them freedom of movement across the rest of the European Union. This is one of the things that I think the European Union really have to face up to and change. But as I say, it's nothing new, and we can come a bit closer to home and look at some of the abuses that of people with money that have been able to happen here, particularly in London over the past few decades. But it is time that we clamp down on that. In the UK, there have been many financial scandals that should have been dealt with. My colleagues in the Parliament have been trying to deal with what are called Scottish Limited Partnerships, which are ways of you're hiding the identity of investments and so forth. They're not actually Scottish, but that's the name they're given. So there are lots of financial abuses. And it is about time that there was an international crackdown on this money that's just allowed to be funneled around unchecked. As you say, quite often we don't know where that money comes from, and we suspect very highly that it comes from criminal sources in some cases.
Yeah. And Effie, I mean, it is a very difficult thing. Cyprus is not the wealthiest country in the EU. It doesn't have its problems to seek economically. This idea that if you invest a couple of million euros, that you can become a citizen, it is a very attractive proposition for a country that needs to bring in some money, isn't it?
Of course it is. And obviously the historical problems with Cyprus being a divided island and the almost contentious British presence in Cyprus over the decades, and the negativity in some cases that this has brought, depending on which side of the Cypriot debate you may find yourself on. So Cyprus has a lot to deal with. And money is money. However, as Drew just said, let us not forget the mystical word of Tier 1 visa, and that's a UK visa. Chinese citizens, very wealthy Chinese citizens have used it over the decades, and Saudi citizens have used it. And as of late, we know the Deripaskas, the Dmitry Firtashes, and the Evgeny Lebedevs of this world, who have also made use of fast-track citizenship routes to find themselves as UK citizens. So this isn't, although obviously with Cyprus you have the added issue of it being a very small country with big financial burdens, a newly instituted entity, if you like. Even one of the oldest countries in the world, the United Kingdom, is very much a place where money can and does buy you citizenship. So it's really across the globe, and very, very much a British issue as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We come back to Scotland now, though, and radical changes to make family court proceedings much more child-friendly have been passed into law. All children's views will have to be heard and taken into account in family cases, subject to extremely limited exceptions, after the Children's Bill was passed by Parliament. It removes a presumption that only children aged 12 and over are mature enough to be heard. The court should also, where practicable, use a child's preferred method of giving their views and explain decisions to children in ways they can understand. Child contact centres will have to meet minimum criteria, such as accommodation and staff training standards, and child welfare reporters must be on a newly established register before either can be appointed by the court. The bill also places a duty on local authorities to consider how to maintain contact between brothers and sisters should they become looked after outside the family home, and introduces a new participation scheme for siblings affected by children's hearings proceedings. Drew, it's odd, isn't it, that we, until relatively recently in our history, the age of criminal responsibility for children was under 12. But only over 12s could comment on where they wanted to live in a family dispute. This is really good news, isn't it, that kids are going to be heard more?
Yeah, I think this is fantastic news. I think the legislation that's been passed by the Scottish Parliament now is really leading the way, and it's one of the ways that we're showing that we are I think, a more socially aware Parliament. That the rights of children are being taken fully into account. And I'm proud of the fact my colleagues and others have agreed to, in the Scottish Parliament, have agreed to get this legislation through. I think it'll make a huge difference in what are really difficult and trying circumstances for children. When they're put into that position, but the fact that their voice is going to be heard, taken account of, and acted upon is really, really good news.
Yeah. And Effie, I know children's rights are something very close to your heart. What's your feeling about this story?
Well, I have been incredibly fortunate in that, obviously, I've never, either myself as a child, when I was a child, or my daughter have been a part of any of these disputes. But obviously, people very, very close to my heart have had to deal with this. And in my interest, as you know, in social science, and obviously my studies in my honours degree in law, I took a specific interest in human rights. And what's very specific about Scotland and differentiates actually from the remainder of the UK is that in Scotland, children's rights are equivalent now, according to the new law, to I consider human rights. So they are equivalent to adult rights. Now, that is a novelty and a very, very welcome legal innovation, because previously children were almost seen and perceived as under the owner or the guardianship, obviously, but if you like, under the full responsibility of an adult parent or carer. Mm-hmm. In response to the particular issue, I have two very close friends who have had continual issues over the years with contact with one parent who had been convicted of several offences, and which they had unsuccessfully been trying to stop, although the child had been refusing to reside with that parent or make contact with that parent. Now, it's a fantastic development that the child can now be heard and their opinion will be taken into consideration. It's very, very welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And our final story tonight, NHS Scotland has agreed a £6.76 million deal to purchase new machines capable of turning around coronavirus tests in just 12 minutes. UK-based life sciences company Lumira DX will supply 300 rapid testing machines as well as a minimum of 500,000 tests. Test strips for the small portable machines will be made at the company's facility in Stirling. The Lumira DX platform instruments can be used anywhere and have been designed to meet needs in more remote locations, making them ideal for local clinics or mobile units in Scotland's rural and island communities. Because the instruments connect to a cloud system, outbreaks of COVID-19 can be tracked quickly by health authorities, playing a vital role in Scotland's Test and Protect strategy. The test was authorised for emergency use by the US Federal Drug Administration last week and is going through the final stages of validation for use in Scotland and the rest of Europe. Drew, this is very good news. This is a wee deal that's been done by Ivan McKee, and he has quietly played a blinder during this crisis, hasn't he?
Indeed, he's been behind a lot of the success after initial difficulties in getting lots of vital equipment to people that needed them, and to all the institutions around Scotland that have vitally needed protective equipment. And this is just another example of some of the work unsung work that Ivan's done to make sure that people are being protected. And it's great. I haven't seen these machines personally, but from what I hear, they seem pretty portable too. So I think they should be able to be moved around. And as you said, for a constituency like mine, which is largely rural and across the rest of the Highlands and the northeast of Scotland as well, and into rural Perthshire, Argyllshire, all these areas into the borders, I think it will be a real boon to those communities who do a pretty good job in terms of obeying the rules and containing the virus, and have done an amazing job complying with the rules up until now. But as we go forward, testing is going to be such an important part of how we protect people, that having that ability to turn these tests around quickly and get the result for people, particularly in these rural communities, I think is going to be really, really valuable.
Yeah, and Effie, it's got to be good news that if we can get these results more quickly. Time is often of the essence when we're trying to contain these outbreaks, isn't it?
Well, especially with schools open, we've talked about children, and obviously every morning when she goes off to school, it's another day of prayer and agony, and not for myself, but I'm sure for about 700,000 people across Scotland, it's the same thing. It's speed is of the essence here, and what can I say? Thank God the Scottish system, which is linked to the NHS, has worked so well in terms of tracking and tracing COVID, as opposed to the English system, which was initially outsourced. I believe that now sort of they're getting a little bit more up to speed. But with schools opening, for more businesses opening, and obviously over the next 10, 12 weeks, with Christmas approaching as well, hopefully this will make a huge difference in the battle against COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do remind you the tests may be getting quicker, but the important part is that you get a test quickly if you have any symptoms. We always say this, but please do book a test as quickly as you can if you are showing any symptoms. That is all we have time for tonight. So thank you very much to Drew and to Effie. It's always a pleasure to have them. And thank you at home for joining us as well. It's always a pleasure to have you too. This is the part of the show now where I do ask for money though. If you are able to support Broadcasting Scotland, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month is what helps us to keep Broadcasting Scotland going and keep developing into the broadcaster that Scotland deserves. If you're not able to support us financially, we absolutely understand. We have talked a lot tonight about the stretched money that we're all facing just now. But the shows will always be free to view online, and you can still do a big job for us. You can find us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. You can find us on Facebook. You can find our YouTube channel and subscribe to that. Click the bell icon as well to make sure you're updated when we upload new shows. And then share the shows around. You can be our marketing team. Let people know why you support Broadcasting Scotland, and hopefully encourage them to give us a try as well. And finally, we always ask as well, if you're interested in getting involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, we have lots of opportunities and lots of work that needs to be done. So do please get in touch with us if you've got any interest in getting involved in building Scotland's better broadcaster. But that is absolutely all we have time for. So Gordon will be back tomorrow at 7. I'll be back on Friday at 7, and then on the Full Scottish on Sunday. But until then, I just have to say thank you again to Effie and to Drew. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great night. Good night.
Thank you. Is that all clear?